We will pray the third hour litanies, the last three parts. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. O Heavenly King, the Comforter, the Spirit of truth, who is present in all places and fills all the treasury of good things, and the life-giver, graciously come and dwell in us, and purify us from all defilement, O good one, and save our souls. Just as you were with your disciples, O Savior, and gave them peace, graciously come and also be with us, and grant us your peace, and save us and deliver our souls. Whenever we stand in your holy sanctuary, we are considered standing in heaven. O Theotokos, you are the gate of heaven. Open for us the gate of mercy. Our Lord, hear us when we pray to you thankfully, saying, Our Father who art in heavens. At the beginning, I would like to welcome all of you for this is our fourth workshop on parenting series. This series will cover the child development and parenting strategies. And we had three previous workshops. We had one from age 0 to 5, infancy to preschool, and 6 to 10 years, elementary school, 11 to 13, middle school age. And today we will have our session on age 13 to 17, parenting for teens. I would like to express my gratitude for consistent efforts done by the servants and the committee member to make this possible and make everything done professionally. And also I appreciate what you guys did in this. And I am so thankful for all participants, the parents, and their reviews, which it gives us more responsibility to continue with all success we achieved in the last workshop, and the reviews we received very highly appreciated the work was done. So I would like just to welcome all of you for this session, and we are looking forward for more after we evaluate the work done, and then we will continue either with the same strategy in this parenting series, or we will approach another topics. So I would like also to ask all the participants, especially the parents, the audience, from everywhere, they listen to us, they are listening to us today, and they listen to us in the other workshop, to give us their opinion on what they have listened to, also to evaluate the work in order for us to evaluate by right way the work has done. Also, I admire all the work done by the servants in this committee, Abuna Jonah and all the members of this committee. They commit themselves to this work. They give from their time and from their efforts to offer this series for us in 4 sessions. And now I will leave the floor to the Abuna or the speakers, I think David and Angie today. So most welcome to take the floor now.
Thank you, Sayedna. It's nice to be with you all. Abuna, did you have anything before I?
No, thank you, David. Thank you, Sayedna, for the introduction. Yeah, it's worth mentioning that we have a large group of servants that have been working behind the scene, and some of which were not able to make it with us today, and you know, even though they're not present, but their effort cannot be minimized. So I just wanted to mention them very quickly. Thank you, David. Thanks, Sayedna.
Thank you, Sayedna. Okay, well, I will. So I'll introduce myself. My name is David Pattison. For those who have attended prior sessions, you've seen my face and gotten to know me a little bit, but I am a parishioner at St. Luke Antiochian Orthodox Church in Garden Grove in Orange County, California. And I am also a community mental health worker. I work for an organization called Partners for Wellness and work on a program called the Connect-OC Coalition, which focuses on increasing access to mental health services and supports for what we call transitional age youth and young adults. So ages really 16 to 24, 25, that kind of thing. So teens and young adults. And I have some experience working in youth substance use prevention. I worked in that for about 5 years. And I'm currently a grad student in marriage and family therapy at Hope International University. So I'm looking forward to being able to speak with you all today. I want to acknowledge as I start sharing the presentation with you all. Let's see here. Okay. Can everyone see the presentation? Okay. The PowerPoint?
Yes, David.
Thank you, Abuna. I just want to acknowledge, as Abuna was mentioning, the committee who put this together. I believe it was Monica Mikael and Julie Boutros, who I think put this together. If there's anybody I'm forgetting, I ask for their forgiveness. But I have the privilege of sharing it with you all today, and I'm looking forward to the discussion we might have afterward. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We will begin with the presentation, and then originally our plan was to break out into breakout sessions. I think we'll see where we're at in terms of attendees by the time we reach that time in our presentation, and see if it just makes as much sense to stay in one large group and discuss. But at that point, we'll open up for questions and answers. Thank you all again. So getting started, as Sayedna mentioned, today we're going to be talking a bit about teens and teen mental health, and kind of in general, just some of the things that as parents we're looking for in teens, some of the things that we can do to most help and support our teens. Often we think of mental health primarily as mental illness. We think about things like depression or anxiety, and we categorize those as mental health primarily. And that's an aspect of mental health, just like cancer might be an aspect of our broader health, or another kind of disease, or the flu might be an aspect of our broader health. But there's also constructive things that we can do to support health, right? What we might sometimes call mental wellness. And so we're talking today largely about what is it that we as parents can do to support our teens' overall wellness, not only their mental wellness, but their physical and social and emotional wellness, and as well as their overall functioning as young adults. So I look forward to talking about that. Okay, so just an overview. We're going to talk a little bit about teen development. So in each of our sessions previously, we've talked about the kind of developmental process for those age groups, some of the key markers of development. What are some things to look for? What are some things to be aware of where we might be a little bit concerned if we're not seeing certain things at a particular stage in development, or if we are seeing some things that maybe are a little bit more troubling. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Excuse me. We're going to talk about some common stressors for this age group for teens, some warning signs to be aware of, and how to help teens alleviate stress, especially. And then parenting strategies. We're going to talk about what we can do as parents to best support their teens. And as I mentioned, we'll conclude later on with discussion and Q&A. So speaking about development for teens, the physical changes that we've talked about kind of in emerging puberty, the things we talked about in our last session for the ages 11 to 13, those things continue to develop throughout this stage, right? So puberty kind of continues on really, and we see some of the major physical changes, the apparent changes for us up through the late teens, early 20s, right? And they kind of start to taper off then, but we start to see a number of the physical changes continue to happen through this age range. There are also some emotional developmental considerations, some emotional changes. That physical change involves some pretty rapid changes hormonally and in terms of brain structure. So that sometimes can invite what seems like pretty radical changes in mood and that kind of thing. And of course, with that, we also see those changes in brain structure. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in depth in a bit here, but things related to the development of their ability to make decisions effectively and what our role as parents is in helping them do that. So at this stage also, excuse me, I apologize. Dry mouth, of course, just now. But at this stage, many teens become interested in relationships. Here, we're not just talking about romantic relationships, but their overall experience of social life begins to become more meaningful, starts to develop more, starts to become more important to them. As we see this in teens who become much more interested in their friends and the dynamics that happen within their friendships, and those become more important to them. That's part of their expansion into adulthood as they begin to expand their family life into other social relationships that become just as important, including romantic relationships, which we'll talk a little bit about later on. Many teens have more arguments with their parents as they struggle for more independence. So in this stage, a lot of those developments that are happening in terms of the brain and so on are developments that try to move them into a greater level of independence. In other words, their brain, their body is trying to form them to give them the capacity to be functioning adults, to function relatively independently from their home life. But they're not quite there yet. They're kind of in this intermediate stage. And part of our big role as parents is helping them navigate that. So learning how we can entrust them with greater responsibility, which fosters independence, while also recognizing the ways in which we need to set boundaries and also offer support. So the brain continues to change and mature in this stage. Much of this is because the frontal lobes are the last areas of the brain to mature. Development is not complete until a person is well into their 20s. And the frontal lobes play a big role in coordinating complex decision-making. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. Impulse control, which is really important because of some of the other changes that are happening in the brain. And then being able to consider multiple options and consequences. In other words, being able to weigh various options and think about what the effect of different choices would be. And then teens develop a clear sense of their own identity at this point and develop a degree of emotional, personal, and financial independence from their parents. So in other words, again, they're trying to become adults. They're trying to become functioning adults, both physically and socially and emotionally, as well as just in terms of their overall life outlook and behavior. So our role as parents is really trying to help foster what's already happening for them physically and emotionally. So at this stage, they develop the ability to think abstractly in a more abstractly in a more concrete way or a more developed way. They have a greater capacity for thinking abstractly. They become more concerned with things like philosophy, politics, and social issues. We see this especially now in our current cultural climate where social issues are so widespread because of social media that folks, especially teens, are particularly interested and concerned in that. There's a lot of energy in this stage in their life to want to do good and to want to think about how they can have a really meaningful impact on society. And so I would encourage you all to think about the ways in which the church plays an especially important role in this, right? In the life of faith and helping them develop the way they think about issues, the way they think about the world, but also as an outlet to help them think about doing good in the world and turning some of that energy that they have and wanting to make an impact, to wanting to find that greater sense of meaning into the good they can do in and through the life of the church, taking the saints as a special example of that. So they begin to think long-term a little bit more. In this sense, they are able to be more goal-oriented. They set goals and are able to think more about the overall impact towards their goals that small choices they make now are going to have. They begin to compare themselves to their peers. They're trying to form that identity, right? And so they're looking to others in their age group and thinking, how am I measuring up here? Am I being the kind of person that I'm supposed to be at this point in my life? Am I becoming the kind of person that I think I'm supposed to be? And one of the reference points they have for that is their peers and kind of social ideas about who they should be. So it's an important thing to keep in mind, particularly as we think about the kinds of friends they choose, the kind of people they choose to associate themselves with, as well as the way they start to thinking again about abstractly, the way they think about what do they value? What do they think about morally, right? How does their moral reasoning lead them to certain conclusions, so that even to the extent that their peers are going against something that would be good or useful for them, or that something that contradicts their values, particularly as young Christians, how do they respond to that? And do they have a developed enough sense of their own values to be able to do that? They show more concern about future school and work plans. And they're better able to give reasons for their own choices, including about what is right or wrong, in connection to what we were just talking about. So let's see here. Oops, pardon me. Adolescence is a time of remarkable opportunity. So although brains continue to change throughout their lives, the adolescent years are a period of profound cognitive as well as biological, social, emotional transformation. Adolescent brains are adapted to the developmental tasks of this stage of life. They are structured for the intense learning they need to propel them out of childhood and into the world. There's a lot of rapid changes happening in the brain. Almost all of those changes are geared towards a kind of rapid acquisition of knowledge and information and skills that will help them in adulthood. So adolescents are drawn to novel experiences. There's a lot happening in the brain because of these changes, because of hormones, particularly because their brains at this stage become more responsive to dopamine, which is a hormone, a neurotransmitter, a chemical in the brain that creates good feelings or feelings of reward, right? This is one of the reasons why it's particularly dangerous for teens to become involved with substance use at this age. I want to both encourage parents, just mentioning that just shortly, encourage parents in two directions. One, I want to encourage you to be aware and to have open conversations with your children about both what your expectations are in terms of substance use, as well as what they think about issues, right? Particularly now, the last couple of years, a number of states in the United States have legalized marijuana, so it's become a topic of particular interest for teens, right? The shifting cultural ideas about that and what that might mean for them. So have open conversations with them. This will be a theme throughout the presentation. Don't be afraid to share your own expectations, but also be willing to listen. But be aware of those kinds of things, but also be encouraged to know that the vast majority of teens don't abuse substances. They don't even use them, the vast majority. Sometimes we hear about it so much in the news and so on that we begin to think to ourselves, wow, every teenager at my kid's school must be doing drugs, and that just simply isn't the case. It's also true sometimes for teens, and it's an important conversation to have with them because they begin to think, because the people who talk about it are the people who are using, so the only ones who are really talking about it are those people who are in favor of it, right? So they begin to think, because those voices are so loud, that this is something that's expected of them as a young person. This is just something that's that happens in school or as a part of a rite of passage, but just simply isn't true. Again, the vast majority of teens are not abusing substances in any way, shape, or form. So something to be encouraged by, but just to be aware of, still to have those open conversations. So adolescents are highly sensitive to respect. Remember, they're trying to figure out who they are and what their identity is, and they're developing these skills and this biological and social development towards independence. So they want to be respected as independent persons, right? So one of the best things we can do as parents is to afford them that respect in appropriate ways, right? So respect them first and foremost as a person, right? So that we can help teach them by modeling for them that they should be respected by people in their lives, right? In other words, they should be treated with dignity by the people in their lives, so that when they later on move into romantic relationships or other relationships in their lives, they know that this is the way that I should be expect to be treated by people, right? In other words, with a sense of a basic common decency. There are, of course, limits to that. Respect doesn't mean that we're allowing them to do whatever they want, or that we're embracing any behavior they undertake and simply allowing it under the guise of respect. That's not necessarily respect in this case, but we're really talking about respecting them as people and being open to listening and hearing their perspectives, their needs, their concerns, and so on. Right? And that's all geared towards, again, helping them develop as people. Adolescents, I touched on this earlier, are a force for good, and majorly so. Adolescents have long been the trendsetters for society, adopting and adapting new fashion, language, and technologies that shape culture. And this can be for good or bad. But when we have these kinds of important conversations with our teens, we have open conversations, when we bring in the life of the church and the perspective of the church into these conversations in meaningful ways and have a dialogue with them, then we can help use that energy towards doing good in society and towards being active and being the trendsetters in our society, towards setting trends which are glorifying to God and which are good for them and for our world overall. Okay. Some common stressors for teens. Peer pressure is an important one. And peer pressure is, sometimes we see things in movies or TV, and we begin to think about peer pressure as primarily speaking about drugs again, some stranger comes up to them and offers them drugs, and the person in TV goes, oh, okay, and they try it, right, kind of thing. It just never really works like that in real life. The greatest source of pressure for teens among their peers is, of course, from their friends, the people who they actually care about, either their friends or people they care about impressing for some reason or another. So it's important to keep that in mind, and really to help give them, encourage them towards values that help them think about the people they choose to spend their time with, right? In other words, the people you choose to spend your time with are the people that share your values. It doesn't mean that a teen should never have a friend who they disagree with, right? Of course, they're called to show the love of Christ to everyone they encounter. But in terms of the people that they allow to have a particularly strong input in their lives, that these are peers who share their values, right? Who are having that input. Fear of missing out. So in other words, they think, or it seems like that everyone else is doing a certain thing, is partying, is, whatever it might be, is having sex, any number of those kinds of things. And so there can be a fear of missing out. This fear of missing out, though, of course, can be in a much smaller sense, right? Just simply, their friends are going out and doing something, and you're impressing upon them the need to stay home and study, right? That can create a certain anxiety or tension that they're going to miss out on the development of relationship that happens when those friends are out having a good time in their home studying or at church or whatever it might be. So that's not necessarily, that fear of missing out is not necessarily a bad thing or a unreasonable thing. It's just something to be aware of, because it does create for them a certain kind of difficulty or tension. It doesn't mean that we should always let them go out when they have other responsibilities to tend to. It just means it's something for us to be aware of as parents and to be empathetic towards. In other words, to express our understanding that is a difficult situation for them, even if they ultimately have to make the difficult choice, or if we have to make the difficult choice for them. And then societal influences, so things on TV, things on social media, things in music, any number of places. We often talk about these things as if they are always and in every way bad things, right? Social media, TV, music, and so on. And that's not always the case by any stretch of the imagination. And we need to respect, to some extent, teens, as soon as they start hearing from us, the TV and the social media and all of that is just ruining our teenagers, they very quickly tune us out, because these things are important to them to a certain extent, right? Particularly social media at this day and age. But we have to be aware too of the ways in which those can influence them, both for good, right? Because there's some good stuff happening out there, and for bad, right? Things that are contrary to their values, our values, to their healthy development. Parental expectations, this is something to be aware of. We can be a source of stress for our teens, right? And there's a couple of aspects to that. We can be a source of stress for them because of some of the things I talked about earlier in fear of missing out, that tension between what they might immediately hope for themselves, that kind of, I want to go spend time with my friends, I want to go to do this, or I want to go spend time on devices or whatever it might be, I want to go play games, that kind of thing. And then the responsibilities that we might impress upon them, things like school, family time, church life, that kind of thing. So there can be a source of stress in terms of just that tension between those two things. And again, it's not necessarily a bad thing, just something for us to be aware of and to try and be empathetic towards. It's just not, it's not easy for them. It doesn't mean that they don't still need to do the hard thing. On the other hand, if our expectations are outsized, if our expectations are unreasonable, if our expectations are not taking into account some of the more deep, more significant difficulties they may be having, touch on this a little bit more in a minute when we talk about academics, but we need to be aware of our own expectations and continue to be asking ourselves, is this expectation reasonable? We need to bear in mind that even though our teens do need to spend time working on things like academics, times at church and so on, they also do need time for rest and recreation, because that's something that we as human beings need, right? So we need to make sure that is being included in the midst of school, of extracurricular activities, and all of that. We need to account for a need for rest and recreation for them. Family dynamics can be a source of stress, right? So the family dynamics of the household can greatly impact how teens think and feel and cause stress along the way if they do not receive the right level of support from their parents. This is another aspect of, if our expectations are significant, but we're not providing them the kind of support they need to meet those expectations, and we're not ensuring for them that the other areas of support they might need, whether it be tutoring or encouragement from their peers or from other adults in their lives, if we're not trying to ensure that they have those supports available, it can create difficulties for them. And so, for example, teens can struggle to properly gauge their own value, right? So if family stress can kind of create this for them, we need to make sure that we're offering them not only support in terms of things that help move them along their goals, but support as an encouragement, right? Encouragement, and we'll touch on this a little bit later, but affection. It can become, we're used to our little ones wanting affection, right? They want time cuddling and so on. And while it may not be as straightforward for our teens just by virtue of being human beings, and also by being our children, need affection as well, hugs and kisses and all of that. They still need that, and that's a part of what helps them. Remember, this is a transition phase, so they are still needing things that are going to help keep them rooted as members of their family and as people as they're seeking to develop their identity. Identity is always kind of this cross section between our own sense of of independence, as well as being able to have a strong web of interdependent relationships, particularly in the family. The other thing that can be important for the family dynamic, I just want to mention for us as parents, is to be aware of the health of our life as a couple, right? So for us as parents, we want to make sure a couple of things: that we are taking care of our own health and mental health, that we're modeling for our children the things they need to be healthy, as well as making sure that we are ensuring that our life as a couple is healthy, right? So it can be easy at this stage because so many of the things our teens are doing, school, church, extracurricular activities, can have such a demand on our time. It's important that we're partnering with other parents and families, that we're partnering with folks in the church, that we're partnering elsewhere, and that we're just carving out time to make sure that as a couple, you're able to spend time together and continue to build your relationship. Because just like when they're little ones, the relationship between their parents is that foundation for affection and relationship and love for those children. It remains the same for teens, even if it's not as obvious in a lot of ways. So it's important for us to maintain those relationships. And sometimes I know it can be hard because we think if we're cutting out time from what our teens need, our children need to take care of ourselves, right? Or to take care of our relationship as a couple, it can feel selfish. It can feel like we're ignoring some of their needs, right? Or somehow that we're not strong enough to take care of everything all at once that they might need from us. And this just simply isn't true. I always, and you'll hear this from many other people, use the example of when you're taking a flight, right? And they do the whole pre-flight bit with the steward, with the folks on the plane, and they talk about if you lose cabin air pressure and the oxygen mask comes down, that you need to put your own on first, right? So that you can breathe and you're not panicking as much, and you can help then your children put on their oxygen mask. It's a beautiful metaphor for a lot of this in life, that if we are not making sure that we are healthy, that our relationship with God is good, and that our relationship with others are good, and that we're making sure that we're managing a work-life balance, right? First off, we're not modeling the things that our kids will need to be healthy and successful, but we're also not able to be present for them in meaningful ways as much, right? And the couple, spending time together as a couple apart from your kids and continuing to build that partnership, that love, that friendship, that romantic dynamic, that's as much as important to supporting your teen as many of these other things we're talking about, because you again provide them that secure base. Okay. School and activities also can be a common stressor for teens. They face enormous pressure to get good grades and participate in the full range of extracurricular activities to even remain in the game, in terms of making sure they've got a good resume, as it were, as they begin applying for colleges. This is important to keep in mind, right? By no stretch of the imagination would I denigrate the importance of their being engaged and working on academics. We've heard it said multiple times, as teens, they have one job. We adults have jobs, we do 40 hours a week. Their primary job is school, right? Of course, we'll add to that all of the other things that are happening. I would say the primary job really is to develop into an adult, and school is one piece of that, right? It's to develop into a healthy, functioning adult. Spiritual life is another essential part of that. But if the pressure they're experiencing academically is causing them anxiety, is causing them to have panic attacks, is causing them depression, and all of that, a couple of things might be happening. One, they might need greater level of support, not only in terms of encouragement and relational support, but those other supports that might be available to them through the school, things like tutoring and that kind of thing. They may simply be struggling, even at this age, we might start to find that maybe a student is struggling with a kind of, for lack of a learning disability, both in the technical sense, what we call a clinical sense, a learning disability, or they simply might be struggling. They may have missed a skill earlier in their academic career that would help them in this stage. So tutoring can help them a long way, as well as there are other more advanced tools available at the school level, including an individualized education plan. So being aware of those things, so that might be one reason, right? But they also might just have a workload that is just too large. And if they are struggling with their health and their mental health because of that, we need to take a step back. If they're missing one extracurricular activity, I'm going to be honest, this is a little bit of I think an important thing for us to really come face to face with. We're so used to being dictated to about what is necessary for them academically. But if they're missing one extracurricular activity, they'll be okay, right, in terms of getting into college. If they don't get into their first choice school, there are going to be other schools they can get into. We need to keep a perspective on this, right? So that we're making sure that at the same time, our teens are really being prepared to be successful in adult life, but they're not being hindered at this stage because of a kind of burden or pressure that's just unreasonable on them. Okay. So career and future, these are things they're thinking about now. Again, we're talking about goals and all of that. They may be struggling to figure out who they are and who they're going to become. At some level, certain careers, of course, you begin preparing almost at this stage, right? If you want to become a physician, you almost start preparing at this stage for what that will mean for you down the line. So there's a need for balance, just like we were talking about with academics there, but it also can be important for us as parents to sit down with them. Remember, because this long-term thinking and this kind of long-term goal setting is still a skill they're developing. So it's going to be important for us as parents to sit down with them, or if we don't feel like we're particularly capable in that regard, bringing in someone else who might be, and sitting with them and helping them plot through their goals with a full recognition that the goals they may have for themselves today at 14, 15, 16 may well change in the next year, in the next couple of years, in the next 10 years, right? Okay. Some warning signs of what to look for. So we're talking a little bit more about some behavioral cues that things are not going well in terms of their health and development, right? So they're starting to miss classes, poor performances on tests, decreasing interest in personal hygiene, becoming lethargic and withdrawn, right? So in other words, they're really sluggish all the time, and they're really kind of spending all of their time in their room, and they're also simply seems to be less capable of engaging relationally. Dropping existing friends and hanging around with others whose behavior is questionable. So there's kind of two aspects to this, right? At this stage in their lives, it's not uncommon for teens to switch friend groups. That happens, and that's not in and of itself a bad thing. In some ways, they could be choosing a better friend group for them and for their health than what they had previously. That's okay. But we want to be aware of that. One, if that friend group is one whose behavior could have a negative influence on them, it's something to be aware of. But it's also important to think about if they're having a shift all of a sudden from one friend group to another, what happened relationally in that other friend group that caused that? Because that can be a source of a number of other areas of stress for them. So it's important for us as parents to kind of be open, to be present, to listen, but to ask questions if this happens. We want to know, were they being bullied, right? We want to know, did something happen to them that was especially embarrassing and that's kind of hanging over their head? We want to know, Is this change because they feel like they're not adjusting well to changes that are happening in their life, both socially and personally, right? These kind of rapid changes don't inherently mean anything bad, but we just want to be aware of them. That's an important thing to consider. Everything I just mentioned, except for maybe missing school and poor performance on tests, doesn't necessarily mean anything drastic is happening for our children, but it is always something we want to start checking in on. Okay, they missed a class, that's a problem. What's happening there? They're having poor performance on tests. Well, do they need other support? That kind of thing. They changed friends. What's the reason there? Excessive sleeping, beyond usual teenage fatigue. So they're going through all these physical changes, so they're going to be a lot more tired. Teens need a lot of sleep. 8 to 10 hours a night is really kind of what's recommended for this age group. They really need that sleep to recuperate because of all the different physical changes that are happening for them. And it's something for you as a parent to be aware of too, because if our teens are staying up till 3 in the morning working on their schoolwork, and they've got school at 8 a.m., they're not getting their sleep that they need, which can be a serious problem for their health and their mental health down the line. So we need to be aware. It's another area where we think about the balance with academics and their overall health. But excessive sleeping or fatigue could indicate depression. It could also indicate substance abuse. It's a probably more likely indication of depression, but substance abuse is something else to consider there. So bearing in mind that if you see this in your child, it's not time to start interrogating them. It's just something to start checking in on, and also to become a little bit more aware of emotional cues, right? So do they also seem to be unusually angry all the time, or do they seem to be unusually sad all the time? Those kinds of things can begin to indicate depression. Something to look for is if a child expresses that they're particularly sad or angry for more than a couple weeks at a time, and this is an abnormal kind of level, there's no other major indicator, it's not like necessarily like a family member has recently passed away or something like that, but they're just sad, inexplicably, that's a time to go start seeing a counselor, a therapist, or your physician, because that would be an indicator of possibility of depression. So difficulty in sleeping, insomnia, and other sleep disorders could also be a problem or concern at this age. So we want to know, are they sleeping odd hours because they're having trouble sleeping through the night, that kind of thing. Loss of self-esteem can be an important thing to be aware of. They suddenly, normally they were a pretty self-aware kid. They knew what their strengths were, and all of a sudden they're just like, I'm no good, I can't do anything right, that kind of thing. Abandonment or loss of interest in previously favorite pastimes. And again, it's not inherently a bad thing, right? They just might be changing their interests at this stage. But we also want to be aware if they all of a sudden they loved this thing, it's their favorite thing to do in the world, and then all of a sudden they just dropped it out of nowhere. We want to know why. Is it because of something it's because they're no longer interested? That's okay. Is it because they're feeling depressed and they no longer have the energy to engage in that activity, or they no longer see the purpose in that activity because of the depression? Or is something going on like bullying or something like that? An unexpected or dramatic decline in academic performance, right? All the things that go into a successful academic performance can be stunted by things like depression or anxiety, that kind of thing. And then weight loss and loss of appetite. So not just moderate weight loss, if they're playing sports and they're losing weight, they're getting older, they start to lose some of that, we call baby fat kind of thing. They start to slim down, they grow. That's all normal. But if we see really rapid weight loss in such an extent that they don't really, they start to look abnormally thin, that kind of thing. Or we start to see behavior cues around food that are concerning, like they eat, and after every time they eat, they suddenly run to the bathroom, right? Kind of thing. The possibility of somebody who is struggling by bulimia might be purging if they are skipping meals constantly. And this isn't, again, a child skipping meals, they might just feel I'm too busy and whatever kind of thing. We want to encourage them towards good habits. So if they think, oh, I'm too busy to eat breakfast, we need to try and make sure they're eating breakfast. If I'm too busy to eat lunch, we need to try and make sure and impress upon them the importance of it. They're getting still their 3 nutritious square meals a day kind of thing, and healthy snacks in between and all of that kind of stuff. It's not inherently something significant, like severe, like anorexia or bulimia, but we want to be aware of those things because it also could be signs of that. Here's a quote from Norman Anderson. He is the former CEO and Executive Vice President of the American Psychological Association. He says this: "It is alarming that the teen stress experience is so similar to that of adults. It is even more concerning that they seem to underestimate the potential impact the stress has on their physical and mental health. In order to break this cycle of stress and unhealthy behaviors as a nation, we need to provide teens with better support and health education at schools and home, at the community level, and in their interactions with healthcare professionals." Great information. Okay, so how to alleviate stress in teens. Parents can help. We can help in a number of ways. Here's a couple. Monitor if stress is affecting their teens' health, behavior, thoughts, or feelings. And just to clarify, any level of significant stress, moderate to significant stress, in other words, stress beyond just the normal thing appropriate to a particular issue. Oh, I'm a little stressed today because I've got a quiz or whatever it might be. Any kind of moderate to intense stress over a prolonged period of time is not good for our health, right? Our stress response as human beings is meant to keep us alive and safe, right? And sharp so that we can deal with whatever task is in front of us. But intense stress or even moderate stress over a long period of time can affect our health in a number of ways. So it's something for us to be aware of. Listen carefully to teens and watch for overloading. Learn and model stress management skills. So again, overloading here, we're talking about, again, they've got too much on their plate and they're starting to really lose their grip. They just can't manage it, or they have so much on their plate that they're skipping out on other healthy, important aspects of their life or values. Again, time for rest and recreation, time with the family, time with friends, spiritual life, time in church, that kind of thing. We need a healthy balance, and we can model for that for them, right? Not only model that for them, but model also for them their stress management skills. In other words, how do we deal with stress? One of the major ways we deal with stress, good planning, right? To make sure that we have the time to deal with things we need to deal with, along with being sure that we're taking time out for things like rest and recreation. One of the best ways we can model that as parents is when we are stressed and we recognize a need to decompress from that stress, we include them. I just had a really rough day and I could really use a walk. Do you want to go take a walk with me? You're now showing them a healthy way of dealing with stress. Or, hey, do you want to go play some basketball with me? Or, hey, do you want to go, let's go pray together. I'm concerned about something that's happening. Let's spend some time in prayer together. You're showing them healthy ways of modeling stress. One of the things we don't want to do is, if we're stressed, that we start dumping on our kids our stress. That's something to do with our spouse or our priest or other people in our lives. But we can still show them these healthy ways of modeling how to deal with stress, both by being open about the struggle in an appropriate way for us as adults towards them. They can be as open with us as they feel comfortable, because that's our job to be able to take that on for them to a certain extent. But also showing them these concrete ways of dealing with it. A lot of stress is physical, so physical exercise is a good way of dealing with stress. And of course, calling on God and the saints to protect us and guide us when we're struggling with stress is important for us as Christians. And support involvement in sports and other pro-social activities for the same reason, as well as there's a good communal aspect to sports. Just a couple more slides here. I'm trying to keep an eye on the time. But so how to alleviate stress in teens? Teens can exercise and eat regularly. That's important. Get enough sleep and have a good sleep routine. Avoid excess caffeine, which can increase feelings of anxiety and agitation. We kind of want to limit teens' caffeine intake in general. It's just not something they really need to introduce at this stage in their lives. If your teen drinks coffee, okay, but we want to be aware of that and manage that. Caffeine is a stimulant. It works on our brains, our central nervous system in a very particular way. Teens have a developing central nervous system, right? Developing brain. And so we don't really want to introduce any kind of, as much as we can avoid it, anything that messes with that. Us as adults, by and large, we've finished our development once we're, over our mid-20s or so. Okay. But just something to be aware of, especially if your teen is drinking coffee or energy drinks, which are really just not good for all sorts of reasons, to stay up so they can work on school. Again, we're talking about a bigger issue here that we need to start working towards that balance. Avoid illegal drugs, alcohol, and tobacco. Learn relaxation exercises, abdominal breathing, so deep breathing into the kind of the belly, what we call belly breathing sometimes, and muscle relaxation techniques can be really helpful. I also recommend here you can include a spiritual component by encouraging them, and you can do this as a family by praying things like the Jesus prayer, right? So taking a prayer rope or something like that and praying, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, or simply praying the name of Jesus, or other what we call arrow prayers that you may have heard of, verses from the Psalms, that kind of thing, and incorporating our breathing with that, right? In through the nose, deeply out to the mouth, can be a helpful way to think about relaxing. Develop assertiveness training skills, for example, state feelings in polite, firm, and not overly aggressive ways. So I feel angry when you yell at me, right? I feel sad when I can't do the things I'd like to do. You know, I would like it if you'd please stop yelling at me, that kind of thing. It's important for teens, both in terms of their own relationships, as well as they develop as adults. And this can be an important thing to model. Again, as parents, if our teens are having a really rough time and they're really kind of losing their temper, to say things to them rather than lose our temper back, to say things like them, you know, I would really appreciate it if you'd stop yelling at me because it's not appropriate to this conversation. So we're doing it in a way that's firm. We're letting people know our expectations, but we're not yelling or anything like that in return. Learn practical coping skills, for example, to break a larger task into smaller, more attainable tasks. Learn to feel good about it, doing a competent or good enough job rather than demanding perfect, right? Because our ideas of perfect are almost always unattainable. And usually we do pretty well with good. And take a break from stressful situations using activities like listening to music, talking to a friend, drawing, time with a pet, prayer can reduce stress. Build a network of friends who help them cope in a positive way. So friends that, you know, at times our teens are just not going to feel comfortable talking to us. So what we really want is people around them, other adults and teens, peers, who we trust, who when they go to talk to them, we know are going to help encourage them in meaningful and positive ways. So start early conversations about other important topics, and let's be honest, difficult topics, things like maintaining open communication about healthy relationships, substance use, sex, and safety. When we say start early, we mean start early, having age-appropriate conversations about these subjects with little ones all the way up through teens, because it's going to create a dynamic of open conversation. I say age-appropriate, so we want to look into what that might be. For teens, we want to start talking a little bit more openly about sex because they're going to have questions. They're going to be hearing things from society. We want to make sure they understand both what they value and what their faith teaches them and what we expect of them and what will be conducive to their overall success. Starting these conversations during early adolescence will help build a good framework for discussions later. Discuss risky behaviors such as sexual activity and substance use and their consequences. Be sure to set a positive example yourself. This can help teens consider or rehearse decision-making ahead of time and prepare for when situations arise. I think sometimes we're afraid when we have having these conversations with teens because we think any conversation with teen about things like sex is going to somehow imply that we're okay with them having it. It does not need to go that way. But we want to have an open conversation so they feel comfortable asking us questions and running things they hear about from their friends. So that we set ourselves as that trustworthy source, the person who either knows, or if we don't know, we need to be honest about when we don't know, because our teens, they know Google. They can Google something, they'll find out, right? We say, you know, I don't know much about that, but let's find out together. Let's take a look, right? Let's learn about it together. Let's ask Abuna about something if it's something of a spiritual nature. Let's go online and I'll do a little bit of research and then maybe we can go through that research together. I say that in particular about sexual activity because you'll find all sorts of crazy stuff online. And so it's good for you to maybe look at it in advance and then discuss it with them, you know, so you can kind of weed out the bad stuff or the nonsense. Keep conversations with your child positive, point out strengths, celebrate their success, be supportive and set clear limits with reasonable expectations. Communicate clear, reasonable expectations for curfews, school engagement, media use, and behavior, for example. At the same time, gradually expanding opportunities for more independence over time as your child takes on responsibility. Remember, this is part of their development. Youth with parents that aim for this balance have been shown to have lower rates of depression and drug use. So the balance is important. Good boundaries, but also we're trying to move them towards independence. And independence really means not just freedom, but responsibility, right? So we're kind of helping them navigate that experience. And honor their independence and individuality in meaningful ways. Doesn't mean that everything goes, but it means that we're trying to respect them as persons, like we were talking about in the beginning and respect the fact that they are developing into independent adults. This is all part of moving into early adulthood. Always remind your child that you are there to help when needed. Some parenting strategies: show affection. Remember, I touched on this earlier. They need hugs and kisses just like your little ones do. They probably don't want it in front of all their friends, but a hug goodnight, a kiss goodnight, a kiss in the morning, that kind of thing is still good. They still need that. They still need to know, especially if they can come to you when they're struggling for a good hug. Respect your teen's privacy. Spend quality time together. Research shows that the better relationship you have with your child, the more they'll listen. Choose your battle. Disciplining your teen may look more like having conversations about rules and consequences. It's important sometimes to set those rules and consequences and then revisit them, right, consistently, and help them see that those rules are connected to consequences in meaningful ways, right? Not like, you got a 95 instead of 100% on your test, so I'm taking away your PlayStation for the rest of your life. Those are not connected in meaningful ways. So we need to make sure that our conversations and our rules are connected meaningfully to consequences. Things like, instead, you didn't do as well as you should have on that test, kind of thing. So I think it's important that tonight, instead of going out with your friends, you stay home so that you can study. That's a reasonable consequence in connection to your expectations. Invite their friends for dinner so that you can get to know them, and you can also establish yourself as an important person in their lives, right? Kind of thing. All teens need more than just their parents as adults, as adult references. They need people at school, they need coaches, they need servants at church, they need Abuna, they need Zedna, they need people they can refer to in addition to their parents, not instead of their parents or not in contradiction of their parents, but in addition to their parents. They can have a really kind of firm, wide foundation. Be a role model, and then pray, be patient, and trust God. All of these things we're mentioning to you about things you can do for your teen sometimes can feel like a lot, but remember that as much as you love your teen, God loves them, and especially Our Lady of the Theotokos loves them. So referring to God in prayer, entrusting your teens to the God who cares for them and who made them, and trusting your teens, and especially your role as a parent, to Our Lady of the Theotokos and to saints like Saints Joachim and Anna, who understand parenthood, right, can be really important. And so we're patient with our teens because we recognize that at the end of the day, just like us, they are a work of God, and God is still at work. Just like He is in us, He is in them. And we know that God wants to bring them to goodness and health and to holiness. Okay, here. Give me just a sec. Oops. Okay, so I apologize. There. Okay, the controls for the sharing screen were in the way of my paragraph here. So some parenting strategies. So listen, and let's talk about here really open listening, right? Or what we call active listening. Active listening is to listen, to both hear and understand. And understand not only the literal content, in other words, the words that are spoken, but also the emotional and practical and meaningful content of what they're sharing. What does this mean to them that they're sharing? And try and act in a way that's empathetic, that hears them out, that understands that they're still trying to work things out, or that they might be struggling in some way, or they may be really excited about something that just isn't of interest to you, or whatever it might be. We want to know that we listen to them and we're here for them. Validate their feelings. It's often our tendency to try to solve problems for our kids or downplay their disappointments. This is just a small thing. You'll see in the grand scheme of life, it's not that important, or whatever it might be. But just like any person, a disappointment for us is still a disappointment. And so it's important that they know that they can be honest with you about that. And then you can say things to them like, I can understand that would be really disappointing. I know you were really hoping that would work out differently, or you really wanted this to work out a certain way. That must be painful. That must be hard. I'm here for you. Why don't we go grab some ice cream? Why don't we go take a walk? Why don't we, whatever it might be. And of course, we want to help our kids solve problems when they need it, but we need to be sure that we're hearing them first, right? And we validate their feelings. This includes in times when we have to set certain rules or expectations that may run against the things they'd like to see happen. So things like, I can understand that you can be really frustrated about the fact that I'm not letting you go to this thing with your friends, and that must be hard, you know, kind of thing. Try to put yourself back and remember back what it was to be a teenager and how difficult that at times could be. At the same time, that might still, you know, depending on the situation, that doesn't necessarily mean we are removing the rule or expectation, but we're understanding that it is difficult for them. That can also help them understand that in long-term thinking, that something can be hard right now, but still good in the long term. In other words, I may not immediately get the thing I'm hoping for. I may not experience immediate gratification, but this will ultimately be good for me, right? That kind of thing. Show trust. Teens want to be taken seriously, especially their parents. Look for ways to show that you trust your teen, to encourage them by giving them new responsibility, but not just new responsibility that feels like another burden. Like, I'm going to now entrust you to mow the lawn, right? That kind of thing. You might do that, but responsibility that has some kind of a freedom, a dynamic to it as well. You know, like, it's a responsibility that shows you're entrusting them to go and do something they might enjoy, you know, kind of thing. But it requires some trust on your part. So doing that to help them both learn to be responsible, but also to understand that they can be trusted. So volunteering a privilege shows that you think they can handle it. And it also helps boost their confidence. So don't be a dictator. You know, again, you still set the rules, but be ready to explain them and make sure that consequences for rules broken are meaningfully connected. Give praise. Parents tend to praise children more when they're younger. But as I mentioned earlier, our adolescents still need this self-esteem boost just as much, if not more. Again, because of these radical changes that are happening for them, and they're trying to figure out, big part of that is trying to figure out who they are, trying to develop their identity. They need to know that you're still there behind them, encouraging them and supporting them, and believe in them 100%. Control your emotions. This can be hard. I want to recommend a book to everyone. I'm hoping that you all can see this. Parenting from the Inside Out. It's by Daniel J. Siegel and Mary Hartzell. I talk a lot about this in greater detail. There's also an Audible version if you prefer to listen to your books, as I often do, because it helps with commute and that kind of thing. But controlling our emotions means just being aware of what's happening in us when we are having a conflict with our teen. At times we might need to say, excuse me, whoops. At times we might need to say, you know what? This conversation is getting too heated for me. I need to take a step back. I need to count to 10. I need to take some deep breaths. I need to take a break, and we're going to come back to it later. And letting them know that that's okay. Sometimes you need to do that. And when you're having a difficult conflict, it can be useful in our relationship as couples, with our spouse. But being aware too, if something our child does or says really all of a sudden creates a rise in us, like we really are all of a sudden surprisingly upset, you might want to take a step back and really spend some time thinking and praying and saying, what just happened there? Why did that take me from 1 to 10 in terms of my anger out of nowhere? So we can kind of process that, and then we can come back to our teen kind of with a greater level of perspective and have a more constructive conversation. Do things together. We've been talking about this quite a bit, but things like, not just things about dealing with stress, but things like cooking together, hiking, finding hobbies together can be important to maybe even at this stage, if you feel like you're a bit disconnected from your teen, than maybe you were when you were a child. Make a list of things you all have liked to do together in the past and see about revisiting that. Share regular meals. Sitting down to eat a meal together as a family is another great way to stay close. Dinner conversations can give each member of the family a chance to check in and talk casually about sports or television or politics or faith issues. If you seem to be struggling to find something to talk about, I would encourage, read a couple of verses from the Bible and allow that to lead your conversation. Just simply ask, what did you all take from that? What do you think that this Bible passage is saying? Or how is this meaningful for your life? That kind of thing. So kids who feel comfortable talking to their parents about everyday things are likely to be more open when harder things come up. And then one rule for these meals, no phones allowed. And we parents have to model this too. By and large, for most of us, our work is important, and we may have a kind of job where we need to be on call most of the time. But for the most part, we can sit them down for a bit. If you can't, you can't. You know, if you have to take an emergency call, like you're a physician or something like that, you understand the context, you know what you have to do. But by and large, for most of us, we really don't need our phones at the table. Be observant. It's normal for kids to go through some changes as they mature, but pay attention to changes to their mood, behavior, energy level, appetite, all of these kinds of things. Again, it may not be anything horrible happening, but it's just important to be aware of, to check in, and to kind of keep up to date. We want to try and strike a balance between two things. We don't want to freak out anytime we think something is odd with our child or unusual. At the same time, we don't want to try to downplay things that could be more problematic. So we just want to check in. We want to be aware. We want to watch for patterns. If we see this kind of rapid change, say in mood, for example, and it sustains for an unusual period of time, again, like a week or a couple weeks, then we might want to take them to see the doctor and just do a little check-in. Okay, when to seek help. So if your child is having thoughts of wanting to hurt themselves or self-harming, cutting themselves, burning themselves, that kind of thing, smacking themselves in a kind of way to like injure themselves a little bit, that kind of thing. If your child's negative thoughts or mood last more than really a couple of weeks, or past a particular situation, so maybe a difficulty with a friend or something like that. If your child's acting out behavior is consistent, so like drug use is always a problem, hands down, but as an example, risky behaviors, getting in trouble with the law, these things are kind of always a problem, but any kind of acting out behavior that is problematic for the family life, for their health, that kind of thing, that becomes consistent, not just like they were having a bad day, that kind of thing, then we want to be aware of that. And we want to try and take some steps to address that, maybe seeing a therapist, that kind of thing, or a doctor. If your child is exhibiting disordered eating, not eating at all, like we talked about earlier, eating too much, in other words, they just seem to be constantly eating, and not in a way of like they're growing, but they seem to be eating, and at the same time, there's some mood changes that are associated with that, right? So they're really sad or really angry, or they're kind of lethargic, some of the stuff you're talking about earlier, and now they're suddenly overeating or not eating at all. These things can be signs of depression as well as other eating disorders. If you see any changes impacting your child's functioning, so in other words, they're just suddenly unable to function at school or at home or at work or with their friends, that kind of thing. Even if you just need help or want to learn pointers about effective parenting strategies, this is great. Parenting classes are available. I would always encourage seeing a counselor or a therapist if you simply just want to work on some things. A lot of this we're talking about our teens, but a good way of being a modeling is that if we've got some areas we're struggling, it might be good for us to seek out some support. And I would say try to act as much as possible before a crisis. This is why we keep talking about being aware of these things, trying to act on them early, trying to take some preventative steps, that kind of thing, because when a crisis happens, it doesn't mean that all hope is lost. By no stretch of the imagination is that the case, but things will be better if we can act before a crisis. Sometimes we have this bad idea of people hitting rock bottom and that's when change happens. It's largely a myth. We want to try and act before a crisis as much as possible. Okay, and then this is our last slide, communication. So communication with our teens is essential for their relationship and for their relationships and development. Good communication involves listening and talking in ways that make them feel important and valued. Communicating well with our teens helps them develop skills for communicating with others. This connects to all the things we've been talking about today. And then active listening. Active listening is key to good communication, great for your relationship with your child. That's because active listening shows your child that you care and are interested in them. It can also help you learn and understand more about what's going on in your child's life. And one last thing about active listening, it's important. If it's clear your child wants to talk to you about something important, as much as you are able, remove other distractions. So if your child is coming up and they're suddenly talking to you about something and you've been on your phone, as much as possible, put the phone down. If it's something you simply cannot pause on for a moment, just say, forgive me, I love you, I want to hear you, I have to finish this email, text, whatever it is, give me X amount of time, give me 3 minutes or whatever it might be, and I'm all yours. And put the phone down and be present. And that is that. Thank you all for your time. So I don't know, I'll leave it up to Bishoy and see what everybody thinks, if we need to try and take a break and then do breakout sessions, or if we want to take a break and then come back to the main room, or what do we think would be best to do? Or do we want to take a break at all, or do we want to just continue on with Q&A and try to wrap up a little bit earlier?
Yeah, I think it might be better just to continue, David. We can just give it like 2 minutes if anyone has any questions, they just post them in there, and we can unmute everyone, and we continue without even the breakout session. We just continue in here.
Okay. Okay, great. That works. Okay. I see a question. Forgive me.